Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating structural blueprint. Chapter 171, The Monarchy of Transmutation. And fair warning right up front, we are not just talking about vague moral philosophies here. We're diving into a rigid, mathematically clear law of the cosmic universe. We're going to see exactly how absolute mastery isn't about somehow erasing your dark side, but instead it requires a complete geometric inversion of it.
To really understand this overarching law, we are going to methodically move through 5 precise structural milestones. First up is the inversion axiom. Then we'll map out the calculus of the extremum pivot. Third, we'll analyze the historical sovereign matrix, followed by the regional defensive grids, and finally, we'll evaluate the permanent tension within the wet ledger.
Chapter 1, the inversion axiom and the pyramid baseline. So the universe operates on a strict, unbreakable law of conservation. Things like human desire, deep-seated pride, and paralyzing fear, they absolutely cannot just be deleted from the cosmic balance sheet. The raw spiritual energy of a shadow simply cannot be destroyed. Instead, true absolute mastery requires that this exact energy be heavily pressurized and then entirely flipped in its directional geometry. That is the sovereign inversion. You are literally taking a devouring void and violently redirecting its valence to turn it into an overflowing sun of virtue. It's a complete structural redirection.
And this brilliantly illustrates the difference between our everyday existence and absolute mastery. Think of the normal, democratic baseline like a massively decentralized network. We all share a tiny, manageable fraction of universal vulnerability. But the monarchical singularity? Well, the clue is right there in the name. It's entirely localized onto one apex. Just imagine the sheer, staggering existential load of taking all that massive, decentralized shadow and forcing it upward into singular virtue. It's an immense strain, almost too much for any mortal vessel to actually endure. Chapter 2, The Calculus of the Extremum Pivot. So how does the mechanics of this actually work? It is a ruthless, highly precise, 3-step process. Step 1, you have to let the shadow hit its absolute maximum pressure. You capture it right at the extremum and you don't flinch. Step 2, right at that unbearable peak, you violently break the negative feedback loop. And step 3, you reverse the vector polarity, because it turns out the absolute peak execution of a shadow actually contains the exact raw energy required to fuel its opposite virtue. You don't suppress temptation, you capture and launch it in the opposite direction.
Now, let's break down the actual math behind this, the Tier 1 law of equivalent valence. Please, don't let the equation intimidate you. The mechanics here are beautifully logical. That -1 at the very beginning, that represents the absolute geometric flip. It's the inversion. The rest of the equation basically maps out the staggering cognitive and spiritual load it takes to force a destructive loop into a constructive wave of virtue over time. It is an exponential strain acting directly upon a mortal vessel. And looking at the sheer exponential math of that cognitive load, it forces a really vital systemic question. Why does the universe strictly allow only one singular master to hold the crown of a transformed shadow during any given epoch? Why can't this unbelievably heavy transmutational burden be shared among a council or a group of people at the apex? The answer to that is the terrifying law of sovereign singularity. By mathematical necessity, if 2 people attempted to transmute the exact same shadow at the same time, their spiritual matrices would clash and generate destructive harmonic interference. The underlying relational topology would completely collapse. The end result? Permanent psychic oblivion for both of them. And obviously, nobody wants permanent psychic oblivion, right?
So structurally, to prevent the system from tearing itself apart, the crown must remain singular. Chapter 3. The 7 Sovereign Matrix Chronicles. Let's move to how this builds out practically by auditing the historical data from the archives. We have a concrete matrix of 7 distinct masters, and it's incredible to see this in action. In the Grand Capital, Ilian Mar actively flipped pride into protective stewardship. Over in Avarice, Vassago took greed and inverted it into generational philanthropy. We see Lady Seraphina in Cyberus shifting lust into aesthetic devotion. Elder Judge Kalel in the Iron Marches took the devastating force of wrath and transmuted it into restorative justice. Artisan Eldrin and Lioness turned envy into communal celebration. Agrarian Kenneth in Southern Oromore converted gluttony into communal nourishment. And finally, Chief Engineer Martha in Northern Leith structurally inverted sloth into dynamic purpose. These are 7 primordial shadows, meticulously and mathematically inverted by 7 distinct mortal anchors.
Chapter 4. Metric Synthesis and Regional Defensive Grids.
Now, these 7 singular masters do not operate in isolation. When these 7 isolated miracles are synthesized, their combined, perfectly equalized valences form the Outer Realm's regional defensive grid. It's an interlocking, self-correcting matrix. In fact, the Council of 3 Powers actually verified the complex math on this. When fully balanced, this combined geometric grid acts as an absolute impenetrable structural shield against any external void manipulation.
But there is a devastating, cosmic vulnerability baked into this closed system. If a burdened master becomes exhausted by that unimaginable cognitive load and deliberately surrenders their free will to corruption, it triggers what's called a counter-inversion. All that massive, stored weight of the active virtue wave instantly collapses inward. It violently spawns a localized black hole of tyranny. And the math here is brutal. The higher the virtue is built, the more catastrophic and far-reaching the resulting collapse will be.
So the crucial point is, what does this macro-level theorem mean for the everyday human struggle? Why does this matter to the common soul? Well, because the system requires constant relief. The masters act as systemic stabilizers, sure, but they are absolutely not replacements for personal morality. Every single hidden micro-victory of self-restraint achieved by an ordinary citizen actually takes mechanical pressure off the master's engine. It's a shared accountability. Without the everyday effort of the common soul, the whole geometric grid would simply shatter under its own immense weight. Chapter 5. The Watcher's Balance Sheet and the Wet Ledger. The archives present a deeply serious, almost haunting visual to close this out. Imagine Belial standing in the frozen, gray wastes, silently observing this perfectly equalized singularity matrix. He watches the 7 pillars hold the structural shield flawlessly in place. Yet the epilogue delivers this slow, deliberate, and grave warning. The ink on the ledger of free will remains permanently wet, demanding that every generation actively sustain the choice. The cosmic equation, you see, is never permanently solved. It is only actively, continuously sustained. And because temptation is woven directly into the living tissue of every newborn biology, the threat of systemic collapse is eternal. The work is never actually done. It leaves us with one profoundly lingering question. Will the next generation possess the unyielding free will necessary to renew the geometric inversion, or will that immense cognitive load finally cause the ledger to run dry? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you all next time.